Pull up a chair, sugar, and lean in close. You ever look at your life, your home, your husband, your very own jewelry box, and feel so safe you could close your eyes? Well, Victoria Trenton did. She thought she was the queen of a perfect castle, but she didn't know she'd invited a fox into the henhouse. Today, I'm going to tell you how a 10-year-old boy's birthday prank unraveled a web of lies that stretched back 30 years. It's a story of a double life, a stolen inheritance, and a betrayal so cold it'll make your blood turn to ice. But most of all, it's about what happens when a perfect husband forgets that his wife didn't just build the company, she owns the ground he stands on. Get your tea ready, honey. This is the story of the woman who stopped being a victim and became a legend. Pull up a chair, honey, and get yourself comfortable. You know, they say the most dangerous place to be isn't in a storm, but in the quiet moment right before it hits, when everything looks so perfect you almost forget to breathe. That was Victoria Trenton. 10 years she'd been married to Charles. 10 years of what everyone in town called a fairy tale. Victoria wasn't just a wife, though, she was the engine that ran Trenton Enterprises. She was sharp, elegant, and had a mind for business that could make a grown man tremble, but when she walked through her front door, she was just a mom and a wife. She thought she'd built a fortress of a life, made of solid stone and unbreakable promises. But the thing about fortresses, sugar, is that they only take one tiny crack to start crumbling. It all started on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that feels like every other day until it doesn't. Charles was packing for another one of his essential business trips to London. He was standing there in his silk tie, smelling of expensive cologne, promising to bring back something special for their son, Alex. Now, Alex was 10 years old and full of more mischief than a barrel of monkeys. He'd just gotten this fancy new GPS smartwatch for his birthday, and he thought he was the smartest spy in the world. While Charles was busy checking his reflection in the mirror, Alex slipped that watch right into the hidden lining of his father's suitcase. It was just a prank, you see. A boy wanting to eye-track his daddy across the ocean. Victoria saw him do it and just winked, thinking it was a sweet little game between a father and son. Charles kissed her goodbye, lingering just a second too long, and off he went to the airport. Or so she thought. Later that evening, Victoria was sitting at the kitchen island, a glass of wine in hand, when Alex came running in with his tablet. "Look, Mom," he giggled. "Dad's already in London. But the map looks funny." Victoria smiled and pulled the tablet closer, expecting to see a little blue dot over the Atlantic. But the dot wasn't moving. And it certainly wasn't in London. It was sitting perfectly still, right in the heart of the city, at the Waldorf Astoria. Her heart did a strange little skip, not a flutter of love, but a cold, sharp thud. She told herself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the flight was delayed. Maybe he'd changed hotels. She picked up the phone, her fingers feeling a bit heavy, and dialed his number. "Hey, honey," she said when he picked up. Her voice was as smooth as silk, but her eyes were locked on that little blue dot on the screen. "Just checking in. How's the weather in London? Is the flight line long?" There was a tiny pause on the other end, just a heartbeat, and then Charles's voice came through, warm and cozy as a wool blanket. "Oh, it's gray and rainy as usual, Vic. I just checked into the Hilton. I'm exhausted, sweetheart. I think I'm just going to order some room service and hit the hay. I'll call you in the morning, okay?" Victoria stared at that blinking blue dot at the Waldorf Astoria, miles away from any Hilton. "Of course," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Sleep well, Charles. You deserve it." She hung up the phone, and for the first time in 10 years, the air in her perfect house felt very, very cold. Now, you might think a woman like Victoria would sit down and cry, or maybe call a friend to gossip. But Victoria Trenton wasn't built like that. She put Alex to bed with a kiss on the forehead, grabbed her coat, and drove toward the city lights in a silence so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Every mile she drove, that little blue dot on the screen stayed tucked away at the Waldorf Astoria, mocking her like a neon sign. When she pulled up to the curb, the doorman tipped his hat just like they always do, but the gold leaf on the pillars didn't look grand anymore. It looked gaudy. It looked like a lie. She walked straight to the front desk, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown clock. The young man behind the desk looked up and started to give his practiced, polished smile, but it died on his face when he saw Victoria's eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She simply leaned over and said, "I'm Victoria Trenton. My husband, Charles, is staying here. I seem to have forgotten our room number." The boy's fingers flew across the keys. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Trenton. He's in the Sapphire Suite. Room 777. Honey, if a ghost had walked through that lobby, Victoria couldn't have looked whiter. Room 777. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a second, the lobby faded away. Suddenly, she was 25 again, wearing a dress made of lace and hope. She remembered the way Charles had carried her over the threshold of that very same room on their wedding night. She remembered the smell of the lilies he'd surprised her with, and the way he'd looked her in the eye and promised that as long as they had each other, they had everything. That room was their sanctuary. It was where they had toasted to a lifetime of loyalty. To think of him sitting in there now, with the ghost of their younger selves watching, it was a special kind of cruelty. Victoria shook the memory away and looked the receptionist dead in the eye. "I need the transaction history for that suite," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "And before you tell me about privacy policies, remember whose name is on the corporate account that pays for your Christmas bonuses." The young man paled and printed the papers with trembling hands. As Victoria took the warm sheets of paper, her eyes scanned the lines. It wasn't just tonight. This suite had been booked once a month, every month, for years. Flowers. Expensive champagne. Jewelry from the gift shop. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. While she was at home building their future and raising their son, Charles was coming back to the scene of their beginning to write a whole different story with someone else. He wasn't just cheating, sugar, he was desecrating the only holy ground they had. She folded the papers neatly and tucked them into her purse. She didn't go up to the room. Not yet. She walked back out into the night air, the cold wind hitting her face, and she realized that the man she loved had died a long time ago. The man in room 777 was a stranger, and she was about to make sure he regretted the day he ever learned her name. Victoria sat in her car across from the hotel entrance, the engine off and the shadows wrapping around her like a cold shroud. She waited. "You see, honey, there's a specific kind of patience you learn when you've spent a lifetime building a business. It's the patience of a hunter." She watched the revolving glass doors, her eyes never flickering, while the digital clock on the dashboard ticked away the minutes of the life she used to have. Then, the doors turned. Charles walked out, looking every bit the handsome, successful man she'd helped him become. But he wasn't alone. Trailing just a step behind him was Tracy, his lead secretary, a woman Victoria had personally interviewed, a woman she'd sent flowers to when she had the flu. But it wasn't Tracy that made the air leave Victoria's lungs. It was the little girl skipping between them. The child looked to be about 5 years old, with golden curls and a laugh that rang out even across the busy street. They looked like a picture-perfect family heading out for a late-night treat. Victoria watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the little girl tripped on the sidewalk. Charles caught her instantly. He knelt down, brushed off her knees, and then he did it. He reached out and playfully tapped the little girl's nose with his index finger, twice, and gave her a wink. That nose tap, honey, that was their thing. It was the secret signal Charles used with Alex every single morning before school. It was the "I love you" they shared when the world was too loud. Seeing him use that sacred little gesture on this stranger's child felt like a physical blade twisting in Victoria's chest. It was a theft of the heart, plain and simple. But the universe wasn't done pulling back the curtain. As Tracy reached up to tuck a stray hair behind the little girl's ear, the streetlights caught something on her hand. A flash of fire and ice. Victoria leaned forward, her forehead pressing against the cold glass of the windshield. She knew that shimmer. It was a custom-designed canary diamond set in a unique platinum filigree, a ring Victoria's own grandmother had passed down, which Victoria had redesigned for her 10th anniversary. She had noticed it missing from her jewelry safe months ago and assumed she'd simply misplaced it in a bout of work-related stress. Charles had even helped her look for it, holding her while she cried over the loss. And there it was, sparkling on the finger of the woman who was currently laughing at her husband's jokes. In that moment, the last bit of warmth left Victoria's soul. She wasn't just looking at a cheating husband anymore, she was looking at a man who had systematically stripped her of her memories, her family traditions, and her dignity to dress up a second life. She watched them climb into a taxi, looking for all the world like a happy, honest family, while she sat in the dark, clutching the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The tears finally came then, but they weren't hot and messy. They were cold as ice. She wiped them away with a steady hand, her eyes following the taillights of the taxi until they vanished. "All right, Charles," she whispered into the empty car. "You want to play house? Let's see how you like it when the walls come down." The drive back home was the longest of Victoria's life, honey. The streets she knew by heart looked like a foreign land, and the house, her beautiful, custom-built sanctuary, felt like nothing more than a hollow shell of expensive wood and glass. She walked inside, the silence of the hallway heavy and suffocating. She didn't go to bed. She didn't even take off her coat. She went straight to her mahogany desk, spread those hotel records out under the lamp, and started to dig. You know, they say the devil is in the details, but I think the devil lives in the dates. Victoria opened her digital calendar on one side and the hotel's transaction history on the other. Her eyes blurred as she began to line them up, and the deeper she went, the more the world seemed to tilt on its axis. You see, Charles hadn't just been busy or traveling. He had been surgically removing himself from their life to build a shadow version of it. She found a charge for the Sapphire Suite on June 14, 5 years ago. That was the day Alex had his tonsils out. She remembered Charles saying he was stuck in a board meeting across town, and she'd sat in that hospital waiting room alone, clutching a teddy bear and praying. But there it was in black and white, a room service order for lobster and champagne at the Waldorf Astoria at 2 p.m. Then she looked at their 10th anniversary. She had planned a surprise dinner, but he'd called at the last minute, sounding so stressed, claiming a flight was grounded in Chicago. He'd sounded so convincing, so tired. On the hotel record? A jewelry shop charge from the lobby boutique. That was the day he didn't just give Tracy a room, he gave her Victoria's grandmother's ring. Every milestone, every fever Alex had, every birthday Victoria celebrated with a thoughtful card sent via courier. Charles was there, in room 777, playing the leading man in a completely different play. It wasn't just a fling, sugar. It was a decade-long heist of her time and her heart. By 3 a.m., Victoria wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were dry and burning with a cold, clear fire. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Her brother, Julian. Now, Julian was the kind of man who dealt in the shadows of the digital world, the kind of person who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who manufactured the needle. Julian, she said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. I don't need a brother right now. I need a shark. I need you to find everything on Tracy Miller. I want her bank accounts, her childhood records, her grocery lists. I want to know where she hides the skeletons, because I'm about to go digging, and I don't want to miss a single bone. She hung up and looked out the window at the rising sun. The perfect life was over, and the morning light was about to show just how much of it was nothing but dust. The sun hadn't even finished climbing over the horizon when the ping of an incoming email echoed through the quiet kitchen. It was Julian's report. Victoria sat there, the steam rising from a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, and opened the file. She expected to see a story of a greedy secretary and a straying husband. But what she found, honey, was a story that went back much further than 10 years. It went back to a dusty little town in Ohio, 30 years ago. There, in a grainy high school yearbook photo, were Charles and Tracy. They weren't strangers. They weren't just colleagues. They were prom king and queen. They were childhood sweethearts who had grown up on the same block, dreaming of a life they couldn't afford. Victoria felt the air turn thin. She realized then that she hadn't been the love of Charles's life. She had been the investment. She scrolled through the financial records Julian had dug up, and that's when the real sting set in. Every penny Charles had used to set Tracy up in that beautiful apartment, every tuition payment for that little girl, Lily, it wasn't coming from his personal savings. He had been funneling money out of Victoria's family trust for years. He'd used the Trenton name, her father's legacy, and her own hard-earned bonuses to build a dream house for the woman he actually wanted. He hadn't just cheated on her, sugar. He had colonized her life. He'd used her like a bank, waiting for the day he could withdraw enough to leave her bankrupt in every way that mattered. He was living a true love story on Victoria's dime, while she was back home thinking she was the lucky one. Something snapped inside Victoria in that moment. You know, there's a kind of hurt that makes you want to curl up and hide, but there's another kind, a cold, sharp kind, that makes you want to stand up and straighten your crown. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back wasn't a grieving wife anymore. The softness in her eyes, that warmth she always kept for Charles, it just evaporated. It was replaced by the same steel that had made her the most feared CEO in the tri-state area. She didn't see a husband anymore. She saw a bad asset. She saw a fraudulent partner who had breached every contract they had. And if there was one thing Victoria Trenton knew how to do, it was handle a hostile takeover. She closed the laptop with a slow, deliberate click. She didn't need to cry anymore. She needed to plan. Charles thought he was the architect of this little double life, but he'd forgotten one very important thing: Victoria owned the land he was building on. And she was about to call in the debt. "Enjoy your breakfast, Charles," she whispered to the empty room, her voice as sharp as a winter frost. "Because it's the last one I'll ever pay for." "Mom, look." The dot moved again. Alex's voice broke the heavy silence of the morning. Victoria didn't jump, she just turned her head, her face a mask of calm determination. Alex was holding his tablet, his brow furrowed in confusion. It's not at the hotel anymore. It's at that old apartment building near the park. The one you said we were keeping for an investment. Victoria felt a bitter taste in her mouth. That apartment. It was a pre-war gem she had bought years ago, a place she'd intended to renovate for Alex's college years. She told Charles to handle the property taxes and maintenance. She never dreamed he'd turned it into a nest for his cuckoo family. Get your shoes on, Alex, she said, her voice quiet but firm. We're going to go see Daddy. The drive was short, but it felt like an eternity. Alex sat in the passenger seat, clutching his tablet like a treasure map, unaware that he was navigating them toward the wreckage of his childhood. When they pulled up to the brick building, Victoria saw Charles's car parked out front, not hidden, not tucked away, but parked boldly in the owner's spot. They walked up the stairs, Alex leading the way with the excitement of a boy on a scavenger hunt. When they reached Unit 4B, the sound of laughter drifted through the heavy oak door. It was the sound of a family Sunday brunch. Clinking silverware, the smell of bacon, and a woman's high-pitched giggle. Victoria didn't knock. She still had her master key on her ring, the one she'd kept just in case. She slid it into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The scene inside was a nightmare dressed up in domestic bliss. There was Charles, sitting at the head of the table in his shirt sleeves, pouring orange juice for Tracy. Across from them sat an older woman, Tracy's mother, beaming like a proud grandmother. And there, in the corner of the living room, was Lily, playing in a small, blue Spider-Man armchair. Alex let out a sharp, wounded cry. That's my chair. He ran forward, his face red with a sudden, hot anger. That's my chair from the nursery. Mom said it was in storage. The room froze. Charles dropped the pitcher, the juice splashing across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. Tracy gasped, her hand flying to her throat, to the necklace Victoria had noticed was missing last Christmas. Victoria, Charles stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. What are you? Why are you here? Victoria didn't answer him. She watched her son walk straight up to Lily, who was clutching a stuffed bear that had also belonged to him. Give it back, Alex demanded, his voice trembling. This isn't your house. These are my things. You're a thief. The older woman stood up, her face turning indignant. Now see here, young man. Be quiet, Victoria snapped. The command was so sharp, so cold, that the woman sat back down as if she'd been struck. Victoria walked slowly into the center of the room, her eyes taking in every stolen piece of her life, the rug from their first home, the paintings from her office, the very air these people were breathing. Charles stepped toward her, his hands out in a pleading gesture. Vic, honey, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. Tracy was in trouble, and I just... He never got to finish that lie. As he reached for her arm, Victoria's hand moved with the speed of a viper. Crack. The sound of the slap echoed through the apartment, leaving a stinging silence in its wake. Charles's head snapped to the side, a bright red mark blooming on his cheek. He looked at her, stunned, his hand touching his face. Don't you ever, Victoria whispered, her voice vibrating with a decade of suppressed fury, touch me with the hands you used to hold her. And don't you dare call me a honey. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. She didn't hand it to him, she dropped it into the puddle of orange juice on the table. That's the petition for divorce, Charles. I've already frozen the corporate accounts and changed the locks on the main house. You have 10 minutes to get these people out of my property before the police arrive to report a trespassing. You wanted a life with them? Well, here it is. But you're going to find out real quick that a true love is a lot harder to maintain when you're broke and living in the wreckage of a crime scene. She turned to Alex, who was standing tall, holding his Spider-Man chair like a trophy. Come on, son, she said, her voice softening just for him. Let's go home. We have a lot of trash to throw out. By Monday morning, the sun rose over the glass towers of the city, looking just as bright and indifferent as ever. But inside the lobby of Trenton Enterprises, the air felt like it had been charged with high-voltage electricity. You see, honey, Victoria didn't go in late. She was there at 7 a.m., sitting in the high-backed leather chair of the boardroom, her suit pressed so sharp it could draw blood. When Charles and Tracy walked through those double doors together, looking tired and bedraggled from a weekend of running, they didn't find a grieving wife. They found a firing squad of one. The office was full. Victoria had made sure every department head and every board member was accidentally lingering in the open concept bullpen. She wanted witnesses, sugar. You don't take down a king in private, you do it where the whole kingdom can see the crown fall. Charles. Tracy, Victoria's voice rang out, clear and cold as a church bell on a winter morning. You're late. But don't worry about catching up on your emails. Your access codes were revoked at midnight. Charles tried to put on that old golden boy a smile, but it flickered like a dying light bulb. Victoria, let's be reasonable. This is a private matter. We shouldn't be doing this in front of the staff. Think about the company's reputation. Think about Alex. Oh, honey, when he said that boy's name, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Charles stepped forward, his voice getting loud and desperate. If you fire me, you're hurting your son's inheritance. I'm a partner. I have shares. You can't just cast me out without a legal war that will drain Alex's future dry. You wouldn't do that to him, would you? For his sake, Victoria, let's go into the office and sign a truce. Victoria stood up slowly. She didn't look angry, she looked pitying. You've always been a gambler, Charles. But you forgot who owns the house. Those shares you're talking about? They were contingent on a morality clause in our partnership agreement, the one my father wrote 30 years ago. Embezzling company funds to pay for a secret mistress's lifestyle? That's what we call a material breach. She turned her gaze to Tracy, who was shrinking back against a filing cabinet. And Tracy, honey, I hope you kept the receipts for those shoes, because the company credit card you used to buy them has been flagged for fraud. You're both fired. For cause. Effective 5 minutes ago. Charles's face went from gray to a deep, ugly purple. He turned on Tracy, his voice a snarl. I told you we should have been more careful. This is your fault. You and your mother and your constant demands for more. Tracy didn't just take it. She snapped right back, her voice shrill enough to crack glass. My fault? You're the one who told me she was a workaholic ice queen who wouldn't notice. You promised me a life, Charles. You're a loser without her money. Victoria didn't say another word. She just gave a small nod to the two massive security guards standing by the elevators. As they grabbed Charles and Tracy by the arms, the two lovers began to claw and scream at each other, a whirlwind of bitterness and blame. The whole office watched in dead silence as the perfect couple was dragged toward the service exit. Victoria watched them go, her face as still as a frozen lake. She leaned over to her assistant and said, "Clean the boardroom. It smells like desperation in here. And bring me a tea, extra honey. We have work to do." "Now, honey, you know as well as I do that when a cornered animal realizes it can't fight with its claws, it starts to fight with its tongue." By that evening, Tracy had gone running to the only place she thought she could win, the internet. She started posting these tearful photos on X, you know, the one they used to call Twitter, showing herself looking all disheveled and sad. She wrote these long, rambling posts about how the Ice Queen of Trenton had thrown a hard-working mother and her innocent child out into the street. She called Victoria a heartless billionaire who used her power to crush the little people. She even had the nerve to post a picture of little Lily crying, claiming Victoria had stolen the child's favorite chair. For a few hours there, the world started to tilt. People love an underdog story, sugar, even if the underdog is a snake in the grass. The hashtags started popping up, hashtag boycott Trenton and hashtag justice for Tracy. The news tickers were starting to buzz, and Victoria's PR team was frantic, begging her to release a formal, polite statement. But Victoria just sat in her study, watching the comments roll in with a calm that would have made a statue nervous. She knew something Tracy didn't: the internet is a fire that burns whatever fuel you give it. And Victoria was about to drop a whole forest of dry wood. Instead of a dry corporate letter, Victoria opened her own account. She didn't argue. She didn't call names. She just posted one single image, a side-by-side photo. On the left was the high school prom photo of Charles and Tracy from Ohio. On the right was the hotel receipt from the night Alex was in the hospital, showing Charles's signature on a bottle of vintage Cristal. The caption simply read, "Some stories start long before the cameras do." Part 1. The internet went silent for a heartbeat, and then it exploded. Every hour, like clockwork, Victoria released a new chapter of what the world started calling the evidence series. She posted the bank transfers showing her family's trust money moving into Tracy's personal accounts. She posted the GPS log of the London trip that ended at the Waldorf Astoria. And finally, she posted a video from the hotel gift shop, clear as day, showing Charles handpicking that heirloom diamond ring while Victoria was at home, thinking he was working late to provide for their future. By midnight, the tide hadn't just turned, it was a tidal wave. The heartless billionaire narrative evaporated. People realized that Tracy wasn't a victim, she was a co-conspirator who had been living a high life funded by the very woman she was mocking. The hashtag shifted. It went from hashtag justice for Tracy to hashtag Charles the Gold Digger. The public realized that Charles hadn't married Victoria for love, he'd married her for the treasury. He was the ultimate social climber, a man who had used a woman's heart as a ladder to reach a life he hadn't earned. Victoria didn't have to say a word about her brand, the public did it for her. They saw a strong woman protecting her legacy and her son, and suddenly, every woman in the country wanted to buy whatever Victoria Trenton was selling. Victoria watched the numbers climb, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. She had turned a scandal into a master class in transparency. She wasn't just winning the divorce anymore, honey, she was winning the world. The day of the final hearing, the courthouse felt like a tomb. Charles sat there in a suit that used to fit him better, looking like a man who had finally realized the ground had vanished beneath his feet. The judge didn't take long. With the evidence Victoria had laid out, the embezzlement, the years of premeditated deceit, and that morality clause, the hammer came down hard. Charles was stripped of his shares, his seat on the board, and his dignity. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of child support for a daughter he thought was his only light in the dark. But honey, a wounded animal is at its most dangerous when it has nothing left to lose. 2 days after the verdict, Victoria came home to a house that was too quiet. Alex's backpack was on the floor, but the boy was nowhere to be found. Her phone buzzed, a text from Charles. "If I don't get my life back, you don't get yours." Her heart stopped, but only for a second. She remembered that a prank from weeks ago. She pulled up the app on her phone. There it was. That little blue dot wasn't at a hotel this time, it was moving fast, heading away from the city toward the old, overgrown woods near the county line. The police chase was a blur of sirens and gravel, but Victoria was in the lead car. She wasn't scared, she was a mother bear on a warpath. They found them at a rusted-out hunting shack. Charles was sitting on the porch, holding a trembling Alex by the hand, looking completely unraveled. When the flashlights hit him, he broke. He didn't fight, he just fell to his knees, crying about how he just wanted his family back. As the officers led him away in handcuffs, Victoria walked Alex to the car, held him until his shivering stopped, and then she did something no one expected. She walked toward the police cruiser where Charles was being held. She leaned down to the window, her face as calm as a Sunday morning. Charles looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I did it for love, Vic," he sobbed. "I just wanted a life with my real daughter. Lily is the only thing I have left." Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "You know, Charles, while you were busy playing Happy House, I had Julian do one last bit of legwork. I found it strange that Lily looked so much like your brother, David. The one you haven't spoken to in years." She pressed the paper against the glass. It was a DNA profile, a laboratory comparison. "Lily isn't yours, Charles. She's David's. It seems Tracy was hedging her bets even back in Ohio. She didn't want you, she wanted a Trenton. And since you were the one willing to steal for her, she let you believe the lie." The scream that came out of Charles then wasn't human. It was the sound of a man realizing he traded a kingdom for a handful of ash. He'd lost his wife, his son, his career, and his freedom for a child that wasn't his and a woman who had betrayed him deeper than he had ever betrayed Victoria. Victoria didn't stay to watch him break. She just turned around and walked back to her son, the weight of the last 10 years finally falling off her shoulders like an old, heavy coat. The dust finally settled, as it always does, leaving the world looking a little cleaner, if a bit emptier. In the weeks that followed, the board of Trenton Enterprises didn't just offer Victoria her position back, they practically begged her to take the helm with more power than she'd ever had. With Charles's shares forfeited and the company's reputation soaring thanks to her honesty, Victoria walked away with an extra 20% of the empire. She wasn't just the CEO anymore, she was the undisputed sovereign. One quiet afternoon, a detective stopped by the house. He placed a small, velvet box on her kitchen island. Inside, rescued from a pawn shop where Tracy had tried to dump it for quick cash, was the canary diamond. Her grandmother's ring. Victoria picked it up, and for a second, the light caught those facets, reflecting 1,000 memories of a man she realized she never truly knew. She didn't put it on. She didn't cry. She walked upstairs to her safe, placed the ring in the very back behind her birth certificate and the deed to the house, and clicked the heavy steel door shut. Some things aren't meant to be worn anymore, honey. They're just meant to be remembered as the price of a very expensive lesson. By the time the weekend rolled around, the air had turned sweet with the smell of blooming jasmine. Victoria was out in the garden, the sun warming her shoulders, watching Alex. He was kneeling in the dirt, planting a row of sunflowers, his face bright and free of the shadows that had lived there for so long. He looked up at her and smiled, a real, genuine smile, and Victoria felt a peace so deep it reached right down into her bones. You know, sweetheart, people always tell you that peace comes when the storm finally ends. They say you just have to wait for the wind to stop blowing and the rain to clear. But standing there, watching her son grow, Victoria realized they had it all wrong. Peace doesn't come because the world gets quiet. It comes when you realize that you are the storm. It comes when you stop looking for a harbor and realize you can navigate any ocean, no matter how deep or how dark. Victoria Trenton had lost a husband, but she'd found the woman she was always meant to be. She walked over to Alex, sat down in the grass beside him, and felt the dirt between her fingers. The perfect life was gone, and thank goodness for that. In its place, she had built something real. Something unbreakable. She took a deep breath of that fresh, honest air and whispered to the wind, "I'm not afraid anymore." And honey, once a woman stops being afraid, there isn't a soul on this green earth who can stop her. Now, you go on and get some rest. That's enough stories for one night. Well, look at that, the sun's starting to set on our story. You know, honey, looking at Victoria and Alex in that garden, I'm reminded of something my own grandmother used to tell me. She'd say, "Child, you can't keep the weeds from growing, but you surely don't have to let 'em choke your roses." Victoria lost a lot, it's true. She lost the man she thought she knew and the life she thought she had. But she gained the one thing no one can ever take away again, her own power. If you're sitting there today feeling like your world is crumbling, just remember, sometimes the walls have to fall down so you can see the horizon. Thank you for spending this time with me today at American Granny Stories. It means the world to have you here. If this story touched your heart, or if it reminded you of your own strength, go ahead and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next visit. Be kind to yourself, sugar. You're stronger than you think. I'll see you in the next story.